Want to drive faster? Listen in as Kinch Rendell, an SCCA National Trophy winner and multi-time Pro Solo champion himself, interviews the best autocrossers in the land. He talks fast and drives even faster. And now here's your host, Kinch Rendell.
Hello, this is Kinch, and this week we have Chris Shinnefield of Redshift Motorsports. This was a fun interview. He knows quite a bit about shocks, so we cover quite a bit about setup. He's pretty much a front-wheel drive guy, you'll hear him say that. Although his shock knowledge from being in business so long, he relates a lot, and I have lots of questions, being pretty much a noob it seems like, to try to understand better the settings, the different types of shocks. We cover that, I think, in 2 different sections. And also what I really like is he talks about business. He's been in business for quite a while, and as he said, sharing the good and the bad and the ugly, and what he learned from going from 7 employees and working a lot and not making as much to now back to smaller, no commute. I really enjoyed talking about that as well, so I hope you get something out of that part as well in business. And I always like to cover people who are in our area and have their own business that we can support, so reach out to Chris at Redshift Motorsports if you have any questions. Today we have Chris Shinnefield. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kitch. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so where did I catch you at? Where do you live? Give us the background. Where are you at?
All right. Well, I'm Washington, D.C. native. I live in Pennsylvania now. I've lived a lot of places in the country, frankly, but I call Pennsylvania my home right now.
Nice. I'm looking at snow outside. I just flew back from Cali. 60 degrees with a little cool there. It's snowing here. Are you like balmy 80s? Okay. How's that out there?
No, I'm up in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and yeah, normally there would be snow, but you're catching me on a record high day. It's a 75-degree day here, and everything is melted. It's quite an amazing day.
It sounds like you guys could be having winter autocross. We actually had an event here last weekend. It was perfect. This weekend would not be so good.
Yeah, well, we have in the past. We've had some winter autocrosses, and they have almost always been with snow tires. Snow tire cars are always the ones that win winter autocrosses around here.
Hey, is that anywhere close to getting rain practice? Is it just as slippery? Is it better or worse?
Yeah, autocrossing in the snow is all about the e-brake, because you just at least in a front wheel drive car, you have no traction on the front tires. So your balance, the car balance, has everything to do with your e-brake, frankly.
All right.
In fact, it was the one time that I ran the Honda Odyssey, the minivan, and I think I beat everybody except Chris Haydu and his CRX with no tires on it. But that was just good use of the e-brake in the minivan. So.
Hey, you had a lot and you had time to get out there, so you had to play.
It's all about the e-brake in the snow.
I swear I'm going to rallycross. I think their first practice event is next month. I keep saying I'm going to make it. I've never used an e-brake for anything. I probably shouldn't use it there either, but it sounds like fun.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I've never rallycrossed. I don't know, but I imagine it may be similar. There could be times when you've got to keep the car from understeering. If you're in a real tight corner, I bet you the e-brake comes in handy from time to time.
Yeah.
At least I'm a front-wheel drive guy. I'm thinking front-wheel drive in everything I do. So, there's no other way to get the back out in a front-wheel drive car except if the tires are sliding. There's no power back there. So.
Adding the gas always for us pulls me back straight. I love that. So when did you get started in autocrossing? Take us back.
So I got started in autocrossing after college. So I was a big BMXer, big into freestyling when I was young, in my teens. Living in D.C., Rockville BMX was the big name down there, going to competitions and whatnot. I had a quarter pipe in my front yard. I had neighbors that had half pipes and other quarter pipes. But as soon as I didn't start driving until I was 18. I was in boarding school. And I always thought, even if I get a car, I'm never going to stop riding my bike. When you're really into something, you think that's all there is. But I'm telling you, as soon as I got a car, I stopped riding my bike. So fast forward a couple of years, I was in a gas station. Guy came up to me, and he said, I was there. I had a Volkswagen 85 Volkswagen GTR. I used to be a VW guy. And he said, "Hey, did you ever autocross?" I think we struck up a conversation, and I ended up out at the local Penn State lot autocrossing for my first time, and it was like immediately I got hooked. And it's like the first time I ever went skiing. Most fun I ever had skiing was the first time I went skiing. I fell down everywhere, but you learn in leaps and bounds. As you get into things more and you get better and better, your learning is much different. But I think that's the thing that hooked me is it was something I really enjoyed, and I was getting better and better. I guess my first memory of after that first time or the first year or two that I was doing, the first memory I have is after about 5 years later, I had starting to get better and better. I had a 1994 Toyota Celica GT.
Oh, I had one.
Did you?
Mine was probably older, but yeah, I had a Celica GT. I'm fond of that.
No kidding. Well, this sort of marked the point in my autocross career, if you want to call it that I started to get really serious in it. I'd gone to graduate school at RPI, was on the Formula SAE team there, and was really getting heavy duty into this kind of stuff. I had the Toyota Celica, and I did double adjustable Koni shocks. I was living in Ohio at the time, working at Honda R&D actually, so I was a Honda employee with a Toyota configured, and went to True Choice there near Columbus, and got the double adjustable Konis put on, and I was in stock class. So I don't remember what else I had, but I had big BFGs, and bought some used rims from Pear, who I think at the time was at Grassroots, and I was enjoying the heck out of that car. It was great. Now, what was interesting is Jeff Cashmore also had a Celica, but his was an ST, and he was an H stock. I was an E stock, and I'd show up at a national, and he would run a faster time than I would, and I wouldn't understand it. It got me thinking. But I went to nationals that year. I don't even remember where nationals was. Where was it in 2000?
That was right before I went to my first one.
Might have been Forbes.
Yeah, the Forbes field.
Might have been Forbes field, yeah. I think it must have been, yeah. So I went to Forbes, and I was in first place after every single run except the last run of the second day.
Oh.
When what's his name got by me? What is his name? I can't remember.
So he got you by just enough to win.
Yeah, well, that was the thing is I was all smiles the entire time until right at the very end. He drove a CRX. He's won a couple things since then. I can't think of his name. Darn it. So anyway, but I was a Honda guy. I started noticing Hondas. Actually, I'm getting my time screwed up here. I left Honda when I had the Toyota. I still have the Toyota, but I bought a new Toyota Celica, 2000 Celica GT. Had some fun with that. But then sold that and bought a BMW 328, thinking that would be an interesting STS car. And I started thinking, okay, STS is where I want to be. And now I had lived in Columbus area for a while. I knew Jason Tipple. And I ended up at a Peru event with a 328. It was a four-door, and it had triple adjustable JRZs on it. I mean, it was really well set up. And he was there with this white 89 Civic. And I couldn't beat him. And he beat me by, 2 seconds on the first day, and I might have got him on the second day, but you know how that goes. It was all about him just maintaining his lead. He was being smart about it. And I thought, darn, that maybe that's the right car to have. And I ended up buying the car from him. And
if you can't beat him, buy him.
Right. I sold my BMW and I went and I bought this little rusty Civic, and man, was it fast. So if he ever listens to this interview, he'll probably get a kick out of this. But I remember when I went to go pick the car up. So he had bought another white Civic. I didn't realize that. And so when I picked what was now the old white Civic, it's the one he had won in 2001, I guess, the year that we had the one-day nationals. So I went to go pick it up, and then I found out that he had this other Civic. So I showed up at nationals that year in 2002, and there he was with his white Civic, and there I was with his white Civic. The only difference being that I had taken off the Topekos that he had on it, and I put the Coney's on it because I thought they were better. And I've had Topekos, the adjustable, the Illuminas on the Volkswagen GTI I first autocrossed with, and I didn't like them very much. And I'd taken them off and put the Coney's on, and I liked them more. And so that's, there I was about 10 years later making the same decision, and I actually took the Topekos off. I bought the Coney's. The Topeco coilover I actually ended up giving to Grassroots Motorsports to put on something that they had, and managed to beat him that year. So he won the first year. I won the second year of the heralded white Civic. The beginning of the white Civic and street touring was him, and then me, and then a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah, no kidding. I ended up buying one too. If you can't beat him, I'm like, wow, that one. Tim Smith has a fast one with numbers on the engine block. So tell us about the setup.
Right.
So you took off some Topekos. Tell us about the setup. Did you have adjustability? What did you lighten or not lighten? What was it like back then compared to the insane stuff we figured out now?
Yeah, what a good question. It's totally different. So I'm trying to remember, but I don't remember having any camber adjustment on the car at all. No front camber arms, no rear camber arms. I mean, lowered it. I got whatever I got, although maybe Jason remembers it differently than I do, whatever he sold me. Off the top of my head, I'm not remembering. I liked running the car lower in the back than in the front. I've always liked that. I like more compliance in the front of a front-wheel drive car and less in the back. The back can be stiff.
Let's break that down. More compliance, meaning what am I going to feel if I have more compliance front?
So, oh man, okay, here we're going knee deep into front-wheel drive strategy and how you set the car up. So my feeling has always been from fairly early on, and it's only been strengthened since then, that one of the most important things about front-wheel drive is you have to make sure that you're not losing grip in front, period. So the way that you set the car up is to make sure that the front has enough compliance in it, meaning it's soft enough to have lots of grip under every circumstance, under braking, turning, accelerating, and you set the rear up so that the car transitions quickly and follows the front as well as you can make it. And what it generally means is that the front can be softer than the rear. I also tend to run the front of the car a little bit higher than the back. And maybe one of the most important things is, for a front-wheel drive guy anyway, is if you're not driving the back of the car, you're not going very fast. So it's people who are just starting out in autocross that are doing front-wheel drive, one of the things that they tend to do is they drive the front of the car, and they get spooked if the back gets unsettled at all. And the reality is, in front-wheel drive, is you're essentially kind of placing the front of the car, but you're feeling the back of the car, because the back of the car in some ways just really almost determines how fast you can go through things in a way. That's my feeling anyway.
Is this, or am I tying this in, where if you can get the rear to rotate without having to turn the steering wheel, you're faster because the front is still pointing. You didn't have to turn the front. Is that part of this, or is that a little bit different?
Yeah, no, it is part of. It's part of the balance equation of the car. Is you don't want the back of the car sliding. You want the back of the car to help the car rotate. So there's two different things when you're talking about going through a turn. One is the change in the direction of the mass of the car, and then something different a little bit I think of it differently anyway, is the rotation of the car. So the rotation of the car happens before it changes direction, right? But the rotation of the car has to be just right, that you're maximizing the front rear tires to get the car to actually change direction, to get the mass of the car moving to the right or to the left.
Okay.
So in a front-wheel drive car, that happens when you're really understanding how the back of the car feels. Because when a front-wheel drive car rotates, if the back of the car is too skittish, you spin out. If the back of the car is too soft and lazy, you sort of understeer. And so my feeling is the way I've always set up a car and the way I set up the BS7 Civic STF car I have now is the same way. It's all about managing the back of the car through turns. Yeah.
Hey,
so, wow,
No, I keep quizzing you, even though I drive them forever. Doesn't mean I understand them. I'll totally admit that. So, front bar, rear bars. What do you run those on the, let's say, EF platform?
Yeah, so on the EF platform, I ran a little bit of toe in the back and an ASR rear sway bar in the back. Early on, I was running the Suspension Techniques bar in the back. It's cheap. It works well. The ASR one just made the car faster. The sway bar in the front on the EF, some people run no bar. Some people run big, like stock SI bars. I tended to run the small hollow bar from...
Oh, yeah, the HF bar, probably.
HF bar, right, the HF bar. So that's and the reason I did that is because I felt it was easier to place the car. You know, when you're at speed, everything's happening so fast. The bars seem to help place the car for me better than having no bar there at all.
Yeah, I want to put it back on. I ran it forever. Jeff Wong was like, "Hey, you used to run the front bar." I'm like, "Yeah," and I realized this was a couple of years ago now. Pretty much no one else at the top of the class was running it. I took it off, and I didn't notice anything. So I'm really looking forward to some testing days this year where I can just test a lot of these things. Because
so nobody's running a front bar anymore?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know anybody one of the top people that run a front bar at all now. And
that's interesting.
Being totally backwards in thinking, I was like, well, when I drove up in Packwood, driving someone else's car, it seemed like the inside was lifting, the right side I wasn't putting in my power. And they were like, oh, yeah, if you have a bar in your car, that's going to happen even more. I'm like, oh, that's the reason I believe I took it off. Was right there. I'm like, I want to put down power no matter what. So that the other difference I realized is I kept towing out my cars in the rear, trying to get them to move more, especially Tim Smith's car that I bought. It just always seemed tight to me. And yet, for other people that get in my car, they think it's loose. So as you said, people need to drive the rear of the car, or as you said, at least be used to it moving some. And that's the biggest thing I find people that get in my car, especially if they don't left foot brake, if they get behind it all, and then they do the air input with a lift, see you later.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely. Are you a left foot braker too? Because I am.
Yes, and that's...
Yeah, interesting.
In the whole Civic world, Jeff Wong is not, and I don't know how many of the other people... I think Jerry Terranova, when I drove with him, I'm now forgetting. I can't believe I just drove with him at the Pro Finale there. So most people, Frank is, Ron Williams is. There's a trend. And then
Ron Williams! That's the guy who beat me in E-Stock.
I meant to say that. Yeah. I meant to say that when I was like, oh, it's probably Ron Williams because he's driven a lot of different CRXs and Civics. Yeah, he's beaten me too. We're in the same club. So, yeah, a lot of us are left-foot breakers, so it's going to be very interesting to hear from Jeff Wong about the right foot. And I guess I only drove his car when I bought the black one, and it drove fine. So it's interesting. I was towing things out trying to get him to move more in the rear. What freaks some people out, but I think it really does depend on how much of a lift you have, your style of how late you're braking. Do you lift beforehand? Do you trail brake a ton? That really seems to be the difference because when Kim Whitener drove my car, she was trying to get to rotate and it just didn't rotate for her. She was like, oh, that's just, it wouldn't work.
Really?
Yet when I hopped in their car at the Pro Finale this last year, it felt magical. Like I had no complaints, left foot braking or not. It was great.
Interesting.
So back then you guys could have like single adjustable or no adjustable shocks. You were dropping the car. Do you even remember what kind of camber you had there?
Yeah, well, I think it was around 3 in the front, maybe 2.5 in the back.
Yeah, where we've gone even past that to the 4, and then the Wongs were running -5 or 6. It looked insane. I mean, I think the optimal would be, could I change my setup? Because at Nationals one year, we had a really sweeper course and then a real just offset course. I would love to actually have enough practice time and skills to change my camber setup based on what I'm looking at if a course is way one way or the other.
Yeah, right, absolutely. One of the things is, and I guess this is just me, but I think there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. You know, how do you set the car up, but there's also how do you drive it, and it's one of the things that tricks me a little bit when I'm trying to figure out what to do on a car. So if I have a car and it handles pretty well, but then I get beat by somebody, you know, what do I do? Is it me? Is it the car? And even at you know, the upper levels where you're, you know, running up front at Nationals or whatever, it's still a thing, you know. So somebody says, well, you need to run a little bit more, you know, compression dampener, and you need to run a little bit more bar. It's still hard to figure out what to do unless you go out and you go to the right site with the right surface and deep testing, you know, A/B testing. You know, who's to say that some change actually made an improvement?
Oh, I totally
struggle with that.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know. I want to pull out hair. I want to do all kinds of things. Sometimes it's tires. If you're not running the exact same tires, don't compare. I realized this last year. If your car, you don't realize it's down on power, hey, don't start pointing fingers at yourself if you can check the car first. The Whiteners said on their podcast that they check their alignment several times throughout the year and before and after Nationals for any cars that won. So it might be an alignment thing. I showed it to a pro here locally after Jacqueline's suspension, 1.25 toe in the front. So Hollis was just killing me. Luckily, we noticed that, kind of fixed it so it would at least be somewhat competitive. I was still learning the car. So I think you hit on something there. You don't really know. Sometimes I think it is good to be a lemming and copy. Now, if you can get in somebody's car that you're comparing yourself to, that would be the ultimate. Hey, let me get in your car and see if I can run what you ran and see if I like your setup. Or get in enough cars that you can maybe determine that before you go changing everything when maybe you had an off day. Or, I mean, I've seen events at pros where a cone is missing. So some people got a fast run because the cone wasn't there for a few runs.
Mm-hmm, right.
So, no, that's a good point that, yeah, can you say it's this or that? It's so much of the sport, it's so easy to make a mistake with 60 inputs.
Yeah, and I think without doing some kind of real controlled testing, you might think you know, but it could also send you on a wild goose chase too. So I don't know. You know, I guess we all do what we can, right?
Yeah. Well, and you
try to have fun while we're doing it.
And you running Redshift and having a shock dyno. I wish I had easy access to one around here, so I could say, "Hey, is it my shocks? Hey, check these out." I don't know how much of a difference, since I don't really adjust shocks much. I don't give a lot of credibility to what they can do. But it would still be another thing. Hey, do you have a blown shock? Did it make a huge difference? I don't know, but if your shocks aren't correct.
It absolutely does. And, you know, I'm not the kind of guy that comes off and says, this is what you got to do, and this works, and you're wrong, and all that kind of stuff. But what I can tell you is that, you know, I've had some shocks here that I dynoed where somebody said, you know, I mean, this is a true story. The car was magic on the first day, and then second day, you know, the driver said it was just terrible. What's wrong with these shocks? Hands them to me, and 2 of them are degassed, have no gas in them. These are some AST triples that I have, and they have, you know, adjusters that are missing one-way valves, and you know, genuinely have some issues.
Yeah, and if they break between days or between runs, all of a sudden you're blaming yourself,
or
at least you can feel, and you don't know what happened there.
How did the gas come out of them? I don't know, but it's really true. You know, if you have a blown shock or something happens, you know, that from day 1 to day 2, you can go from first, which the car did, I guess in the ladies class, to the car is terrible and I can barely keep it straight. You know, it's that big of a difference. Anyway, yeah, the dyno does help in that way. One of the things I've been working with lately is trying to understand what the dyno is telling me. You know, I mean, there's these PVP plots. Those are the ones that you see. They're sort of the marketing graph, you know, where they have 10 points and they show a peak force on them. compression side. But that's not a very useful graph, frankly. There's the CVP one, which is the one that with all the fancy curves, or most people have seen the football dyno graph, which is useless as far as I'm concerned. It's so hard to read. But the reality is the peak force the shock makes is not very helpful. What is very helpful is what kind of forces is the shock making through its cycle. And that's the CVP graph stuff. So, and even knowing that and looking at that, I've learned some things, but it's like anything. The more you know about something, the more questions you have, and the more that I realize the dyno doesn't do everything I wish it could do. It's sort of a basic $8,000-$10,000 dyno, but it's not the $250,000 Magno crazy dyno that some people have, like it can't do everything that I wish it could do.
So basically you can easily check compliance, say, hey, this is how they were to begin with or should have been, and this is what they're at now. Tell us, what do you know about, I always hear about low speed versus high speed compression. Like the good shocks have more of one or the other. I guess if you hit a bump, they go easier. What does that mean?
Well, this is something I've been learning recently. So I had motion control shocks on my car the last couple of years, and they're just amazing. They were external reservoir, double adjustable, and they were magic. And then with some weird stuff going on with Koni about 6 months ago, I started looking for some alternatives to Koni shocks for street guys. The Koni Sports are great, but what else is out there? So, I look at Bilstein. I love Bilsteins, and I remember, what's his name? Carroll Smith. I remember him doing a talk at Nationals 15 years ago or something before he passed away. And I remember him saying, yeah, the Konis are great, but the Bilstein's a better shock. I didn't quite understand what he meant at the time, but the idea is, what he was saying, I think, was that the monotube shock does have big advantages when it comes down to performance, when it comes down to racing. And so back to the story. So 6 months ago, I was getting annoyed and with some business stuff that was going on, and I said, I need to find something else here. So I was looking in the Bilstein, but most of my customers, 90% of them are street guys. And so the focus wasn't on me; it was on customers, really. With me, having fun while I'm doing it, that's always a priority. And so I was trying to figure out how to make a Bilstein adjustable. And I was drawing all this stuff on napkins and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I don't know, a month or two later, I've gone through all sorts of different research, and I've sort of stumbled upon this whole BC racing coilover thing. And my first thought was, Taiwanese coilover, Fortune, everybody hates it. But doing a little bit more research about it, one of the things I discovered was that they're very similar to the Bilsteins, and they have a lot of the same dimensions. And so I started doing a lot of shock dyno stuff with them, and I started realizing that they're not bad, and they seem to be really durable and decent price. And I can make them very similar to the motion controls. Now, I'm not saying they're the same as the motion controls. They're not. But they're not bad, especially for the price. The motion control double adjustables I had, the whole kit, including all the springs and everything, was north of $5,000 on a $5,000 Civic. I kind of like the idea, hey, not just for me, and I've actually already sold the motion control suspension, because I thought, I'm going to make these BC racing coilovers work. Not only are they decent out of the box, and they're actually quite Koni-like. They're very soft in compression and quite stiff on rebound. But I can revalve them. And not only can I revalve them, but I can do some pretty cool stuff with them. They have, like I said, a 46-millimeter piston with a 12-millimeter ID that would fit all sorts of other stuff, Bilstein pistons and Olin pistons, I think, too. And I can revalve them. I got the dyno. I can play with these. And not only that, but I might have just found a great replacement for a Koni adjustable for the street. Now, it's a coilover. I know it's not replacing everything that the Koni Yellow is, because Koni Yellows on stock springs or lowering springs is fantastic. that this is a legitimate, like, I'm really interested. So, so what your question, I'll answer your question now after 5 minutes of prelude here. What I've learned from the motion controls and what I'm learning more about now is that race shocks tend to be very different than street shocks. And where street shocks tend to be very soft on compression, really soft, the idea is keeping you comfortable, and tend to be they tend to run high rebound damping to keep to be able to control whatever spring you throw out of, or be able to control the car. Race shocks tend to be, I think, more compression oriented. You tend to start wanting to control the mass of the car with the compression and the springs. And the rebound is also important, but you start, instead of just throwing a little rebound at the car to make it feel like it's stiffer or, have control, you start worrying about things like, how does the wheel follow the back of bumps? How are you not losing grip? You start throwing around terms like hysteresis, and is hysteresis good or bad? And I think a little hysteresis is good, frankly.
How do you spell that? That's new to me.
It's like hysterical.
Okay.
But put an sis on the end. Hysteri. Hyster. Hysteresis.
I'll try to look it up. I'll put a little star right here and try to look that one up for the show notes so I can get it spelled correctly.
Okay. So these are, to say that I know what the heck I'm doing with these things yet, I don't. And in fact, I've been working with a lot of the local people around here. A guy with an RX-7, Jeff with an RX-7, and I've been trying to sort of get other people involved where I'm essentially doing free work for them, because I'm trying to learn everything I can about these shocks, because I just think they're really cool. The idea of sort of a Bilstein-style shock with an adjustable bleed shaft, the little, external adjustment up at the top of the shock that, comes with basically everything you need for like $1,000. It's a, and something that maybe could rival something 2 or 3 times as expensive. I think for my business, it's a big deal, and I'm trying to prove it on my own car, and that's a challenge, and I think I'm going to enjoy it.
Nice. Oh, so I used to always hear about the Moton, I think, shocks having tons of compression. I believe somehow Andy Hollis had Bilsteins that were, I think they were remote reservoir and adjustable somehow. But I seem to say they included tons of compression or something is what he accomplished in that.
Yeah, and actually I have his old shocks here. There's a customer that, he had, at least for a Civic, he had 2 sets made. I have the second set here apparently. And that's correct. So, and it's sort of an AST Moton hybrid that this is. And it's a great shock, and that's true. It's very heavy on compression. And that's the way the motion controls were for my car as well. And I was running noticeably more compression than rebound, and the compression was very digressive, and the rebound was quite linear, meaning maybe I can give you what that means in terms of the CVP graph, but you'd have the compression side of the graph. It would as soon as it would start seeing any compression at all, it would give it a whole lot of force pretty much immediately, and then the valve stacks would open. But then on the rebound side, it was very lazy in creating damping force. And in fact, this hysteresis thing that I'm talking about, it would actually, as you compress the shock, if you just you compressed it and then held it there, even though the shock wasn't moving, it was still creating quite a good amount of outward force. It would register on the dyno at 0 velocity. That's the hysteresis thing, and it shouldn't, right? It shouldn't. If the shock's not moving, it shouldn't be creating any force, right? But in the dynamics of the shock, when the wheel is forced into the fender well under compression, as the wheel stops, it starts to rebound back down. The shock is creating force, like spring force, to try to push the tire back down. And I believe, and this is, just me and my sort of simple thinking, I guess, is that, what comes after compression is rebound, and it actually helps the tire follow the back of the bump, follow the back of whatever it's just gone over, because it's actually sort of the equivalent of, a little bit of spring force.
And would there be any reason to have that happening versus just more spring?
I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that. It's a good question.
Yeah, and you don't have to.
I think.
What's interesting is I think they're 3011 Coneys. I would put a board on top of them to compress them and have to sit on it and stay sitting on it because of exactly what you're saying. Like it would push back at a tremendous, 40, 50 pounds of force, it seemed like. I'm not sure if your shock dyno reads in pounds.
Yeah, sure, yeah. No, it was probably 75 or 100 pounds of force. It could have been.
Sure, I do weigh over 100 pounds. That makes sense. I was like, this is hard to keep compressed and to supposedly push a button and rotate the shaft, which I never ever did. It was just insane. Or maybe for some reason I was trying to compress them, and I was like, this is insane. I'm having to sit on these shocks with a board to compress it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. So the monotube shocks, they run a lot of internal nitrogen pressure. Twin tube shocks don't, so you don't generally have a lot of that kind of force on a twin tube shock. They're generally fairly easy to compress. But monotube shocks can have a lot, and the amount of force generated is related to the cross section of the shaft. So if you're running a 22 millimeter shaft, it exerts more outward force because of the nitrogen pressure than if you have a smaller, like 12 millimeter shaft. And it's one of the reasons why, when you buy motion controls or any of the other good shocks, you'll have a big shaft on the front and the rear of the car. The shocks that are trying to be softer and more street oriented, they tend to run smaller shafts. And even on some street coilovers you see, or other coilovers that run inverted. You ever seen an inverted coilover where it looks like a gigantic shaft?
And that's what David Whitener started doing on the EF Civic, at least in the rear. He inverted those Bilsteins. Okay,
and that could be, but what I'm talking about is actually an inverted shock on a strut in a strut setting.
Oh wow!
And when you have an inverted shock on a strut setting, what you generally have is what looks like a gigantic shock shaft, sticking out of inside the spring, but it's actually the body of the shock that's inverted.
Oh.
And then you have a small shaft inside the body of the shock. And so an inverted shock with a small shaft on a strut car can be relatively more compliant in some ways than a non-inverted shock. So sometimes you'll hear people saying, well, you invert this, it's better, it's stronger. Yeah, that's true. Maybe in rally driving that matters, but a lot of times what people are feeling is that it's a little more comfortable because it's a small shaft that you don't even see. But the race shocks, get back to race stuff. The race shocks tend to have larger pistons. MCSs are larger pistons, and all the expensive stuff tends to be bigger piston, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying to now remember the 2812s versus 3011s. Are they both monotube, or only the 2812s monotube?
Yeah, they're both monotube. 30 and the 28 are both monotube. I can't remember offhand.
So now I'm thinking the big difference might just, for me, it was thinking the adjustability that you could adjust both the rebound and compression of the 2812s seemed to me to be the magic key of why I'd want to get those.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think they were aluminum, so it was like, hey, I can save some weight right there.
And they're lighter.
Yeah, that I can weigh and know that I'm saving something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when I sold my car, I sold it to Tad Kaminsky, good guy, and then we sold it to Cy Lee, another good guy, and I co-drove with them. By the time Cy was done with the car, it was an STX and ran a limited slip and 2812s and all crazy brakes in the front and stuff. And he had the 2812s, and they were fun to play with. Good shocks.
So
yeah, when you.
I want to hear about settings, but before I got to write that down, settings. But is there any difference, remote reservoir, three-way? What can you tell people if they're looking at shocks? If they're a beginner, what should they be thinking, intermediate, expert? What's your opinions on that?
All right. If you're a guy who's just trying to have fun, you can just stick with single adjustable. The Koni Sports are great. Soft on compression, hard on rebound, that's fine. Just go have fun. If you're trying to go faster, you have to start thinking about other things. And that's where the double and triple adjustable stuff comes in. Double and triple adjustable generally means you can start messing with compression more. And that will make you faster. Now, exactly what curve you want on the compression side has to do with several different things, but generally low speed is a bleed and has to do with how the shock acts when it's moving very slowly, which is its first movement, essentially. So if the shock is standing still, the low speed is how fast do you want the shock to start creating damping? If you back off the low speed, it doesn't start creating damping right away. But as it accelerates, as the piston accelerates, the high speed damping is the other knob, is the high speed damping. And
if I'm in a slalom back and forth, a quick slalom, that's probably more high speed to begin with, and would low speed be going into some big, huge sweeper, maybe?
Are you talking about low speed and high speed about the speed of the car?
No, I'm talking about the speed of the shock. When is the shock going to be moving at low speed versus high speed? Is it like a slalom back and forth versus big sweepers or bigger offsets?
Man, I think it has low speed versus high speed has more to do with how much grip you have and how you want the car to act as soon as you make an input. So if you can imagine, you have a lot of low speed damping. As soon as you make an input, as soon as you start to rotate the car and the tires start exerting their force, it's going to act on the body immediately. The problem though is if you don't have enough grip, if the surface is bumpy or dusty or in the rain, you can overdo how quickly it's going to create force, and you'll end up in a situation where the tire will skitter over the surface.
So that's where if it's wet, they say make your car softer. You would turn down the amount of compression or low speed compression, whatever compression adjustments you have. You would turn that down so the car takes longer to set. So in my mind, I'm thinking instead of driving an ST stiff car, I'm going back to a stock car that takes longer to set. Therefore, I have more time to feel the amount of grip I have before I lose it.
Right. And the low speed, the low speed settings on shocks tend to make huge adjustments, but really the low speed adjustment has to do with how much grip or how bumpy the surface is, I think. So if you're in a sweeper and it's a bumpy sweeper, or there are cracks in the pavement going through the sweeper, and you feel the car losing traction going over those and upsetting the car or going off line, then backing off low speed is going to help you more than high speed, because if the tire is skittering over the surface, you're asking too much of the tire as it goes over the bump. If you take some low speed damping, if you take low speed damping out, it will sort of absorb the bump, the bump or the crack, something that's a very hard hit, like washboard kind of, the kind of thing that will make the tire lose traction. It's the low speed damping, if you turn that down, will sort of allow the tire not to lose traction.
Like skitter across it. Basically, and since I just talked with Ross Bentley and heard his presentation, That's making me think that if it's skidding, it's coming off the ground. You're also then throwing the weight of the car probably back and forth. You're probably actually bouncing some weight from the rear of the car if it's skidding back there or chirping to the front. You're probably sending a vibration or a wave of weight transfer back and forth even.
Well, what I'm talking about is not the kind of thing that's going to make the car go up and down. What I'm talking about is like cracks in the pavement. The kind of thing where if you're at the limit,
it starts skipping a little bit.
It's like having too much pressure in your tires. It's the same kind of thing. That low speed is the equivalent of adding a little bit of compliance to very small changes in the shock, where you need to take some out to make it. It's like taking air out of the tire, and maybe that's, again, engineers may be going like, "What the hell is he talking about?" I don't know, but it's that kind of thing where if the surface is perfect, you can have a higher pressure tire and it will grip fine. But the second you add a bump to that surface, the higher pressure tire will lose traction, whereas a lower pressure tire will absorb that.
Oh, exactly.
That's kind of the difference. So it's not something that's going to make the front of the car go up in the air and make throw. I mean, it's about those very small, not as small as the tire will absorb, but it tends to be small bumps. And if you're going around a corner and you're hitting a bump and that you're losing the front of the car, you could probably help it by taking some of the low-speed damping out.
Yeah, no, that makes enough sense for sure. And then to also realize what you're talking about with tire pressures reminded me that some people I've heard will make their car so stiff that the tire is now a bigger part of the suspension because it's softer than the suspension. Do you ever think about that as you're doing either air pressures or what the tire load is or something with your suspension?
Yeah, I'll tell you my feeling on that, and I come at it from a little bit different direction, and that is I tend to try to maximize the grip on the front tires. Again, we're talking front-wheel drive. Maybe every car is like this. But maximize the grip on the front, and that's with shocks and everything else, and then make the back easy to drive or fast to drive, whatever you want to call it. And that, for some people in a stock car, they tend to go up in pressure to try to get the rear rotating, and I've heard, well, it increases spring rate and it does this and that. I've always been a fan of going lower in the back, and the reason is because a high-pressure tire has very little compliance to it, and it tends to go from grip to slide very quickly. Like if you looked at a graph of slip angle versus, lateral G's, it would be very peaky with a tire, a hard tire. But if you soften the tire up, a curve gets more broad, and so in a way you have more area on top of the curve to drive the car. So you tend to be able to drive the car more aggressively, more confidently. And the other thing that's really important, I think, is when you have a stiff tire, there's not as much slip angle to the tire, right? When you lower the pressure, there's more and more slip angle. The softer the tire, the more slip angle there is. So if you're trying to help the car rotate, you want to lower the pressure and lower the pressure and lower the pressure, because it also helps the slip angle of the tire, which is the equivalent of adding toe out to the back. But sort of dynamically, you only get more slip angle the more you're asking of it. And of course, you don't want to go too low. I mean, I've gone as low as 12 psi on a radial tire, which is a little crazy, just to see what it would do.
I had the question written down: how low would you go? Because I've always been the high pressure guy, probably because I drove the D-Stock Integra for so long. I wanted it looser. But like you're saying,
but
that gets
still go lower.
really slippery very quickly. And I think everything you're describing about the top, the peaky, are making it bigger. You're making a bigger sweet spot of the amount of grip you have. It's easier to drive, like you're saying.
Yeah. And there's another benefit to it, I think, and that is that you get slip angle earlier in the turn, earlier in your input, meaning With a hard tire, the tire grips and grips and grips and grips. It doesn't give you much slip angle all the way up until it goes off. It's a very peaky. Whereas a softer tire, even if you're not at the limit of the tire, it still gives you slip angle. It still helps the car rotate. And what it means is that in the turn, as you progress to the maximum grip of the tire, as you're getting to maximum grip of the rear tire, it's also giving you more slip angle, which means the car rotates. The back of the car rotates better. So instead of having to flick the car into things like you do with a hard rear tire, you can drive into things on the gas a little bit better. So you do more, brake in a straight line, get on the gas, and then enter the turn rather than, get almost past the cone and then, lift throttle and flick the car or something.
Yeah, that's. I think people should really think about that in terms of, especially if you're co-driving. If, like, I can think with co-drivers with me, I kept doing the up pressure, or a car that's more snappy like that, I think, is what people seem to believe is, I can't, it's hard to catch the car, or I spin it out. You might just want to lower the rear pressures and see if that makes it much easier to drive, because all of a sudden you're really changing the dynamics of that. That's what's really cluing into me what you're saying. I would like to experiment with that even more. But then if you're driving a car with somebody else and you're like, Kinch, your car's way too loose, hey, maybe you should drop 5-10 pounds of pressure out of the rear and see if that makes it more compliant for you, easier to catch, more progressive, I guess, is maybe the term.
No, well, that's the thing. If you have a hard tire, you don't get a lot of slip angle in the back. So the back is tight. It doesn't want to help you all the way up until it loses grip. And then you're kind of sliding the car around, So if you're having trouble with the car, the higher you go in the rear tire pressure, the harder it is to drive. Whereas if you go down, it gets easier to drive, and the increased slip angle before you get to the limit of the tire, because it's a softer tire, helps the car rotate everywhere. Yeah. Not just where you are like, oh my God, I'm behind now.
I'm ready to go try it. I'm ready. Sign me up. Let me get out there, Coach. I'll be back.
Give it a try. I tell you what, I tell everybody that will listen to that idea. And I think it's the right thing to do. It's what I've always done. On the 07 Civic I have now, I tended to try to stay with the higher rear pressure, not high pressure, but a little bit more sort of normal rear pressure rather than going low and messing with toe. But because a softer tire doesn't grip quite as well, right? So the trade-off is try to get the toe right where you want it, where the tire pressure should be. But you can use lowering tire pressure really well, from run to run, or for changes between drivers. And especially for any kind of testing, I think. And I even find that I tend to, depending on the situation, I tend to lower the rear pressures because the balance of the car changes from run to run.
As they warm up.
Yeah.
And
the rears will grip more and more. The fronts will still be good, but the rears are starting to grip more and more. And so your third run, like at the Nationals, the car can actually not be as good your third run because the car's not rotating as well.
It's getting tighter and tighter. How much pressure would you let out? Because, once again, I know the other side where my first runs, if my normal setup's 28 all around, if I'm scared that it's cool out and I'm first driver, I'm taking 2 pounds out of the rear, 2 or 3 probably, because I want my first runs to stick just so I'm not mentally weirded out by that. How much?
Yeah, I do this.
But then I let them go up because I want my car, like you're saying, to still slide around in the rear. So for me, I'm letting it go up. How much would you take out as a test, or how much do you actually take out?
Well, I'm thinking back a few years now. On the EF Civic, the '89 Civic, I tended to run. On my car now I run 36 front and about 32 or 31 rear, and I don't have to change it much because it's pretty dialed in. But if I was having trouble, I might go down 2 pounds in the back. If I was having a lot of trouble, I might go down 4 or 6. On the EF Civic, I would start with maybe 34 front, 33 front, and I'd start about 29 or 30 in the back. And then I would regularly be down around 26 or even 24 by the third run.
Okay.
And it has a lot to do, too, with how much confidence you have and how much you know the course, you know. You're not quite sure the first time you go through the course, but you want the car to be steady. And so you don't want to run low pressure and cold tires. So I tended to feel like running a little bit more normal rear pressure. The first run helped me too. Just like you, I think it's the same way.
Yeah, we just exactly opposite. And for whatever reason, mine was what I've realized I make so many assumptions, or I hear something from somebody. Okay, I'm going to do that. And it's just like this last course, we had an optional slalom. Well, pretty much every time I choose an optional one way or the other, I stick with it. Same thing with what I do in autocross. Hey, I've been doing it like that forever instead of changing up. Something I really want to point out to people that all this talk about tire pressure made me realize, at Spring Nationals last year when Brian Peters, Jeff Wong, Jason Frank, all of us, Matthew Braun were out there driving, we had my Civic and we were playing with, I think the 2812s on there. And everybody's like, man, it's really weird. It's kind of terrible. Oh, let's change this. Let's change that. Finally, Brian Peters goes, what air pressure do you have in the rear? I'm like, oh, I haven't checked it. It was up to like 38 or something. And
oh, man.
The car was terrible. Once we took that out, he was like, oh, all better. So you said something to that effect that basically your tire pressure, once it gets so far up, even us playing with those shocks could not fix it because it was probably so stiff, it was probably losing the compliance.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, you know, tire pressure, your tire pressure should be affected by the weight at that end of the car. So a front-wheel drive car is heavier in front than in the back. So a tire with more pressure in the front makes sense. A tire with less pressure in the back makes sense because with the same amount of weight, you get, you know, roughly the same kind of performance or situation out of the tire, right? But the other thing, too, is that this, you know, you can do as many calculations as you want to do about spring rates and suspension frequencies and whatever. But as soon as you step on the pedal, that's all out the window, you know. So when
because you've moved weight around.
Because you've moved weight around and you've taken grip away from the front tires and, you know, your steering inputs aren't perfect and whatever else. So it really has more to do with feeling confident about the car. And my really strong opinion about this is that going higher with the rear tires makes it harder to drive. And so no matter what you do from then on, you've made the car harder to drive. So I think that optimized tire pressure is wherever it makes sense. It has something to do with how much toe you have or how comfortable you are with the back of the car moving. I run, actually my 07 Civic, when it had no urethane bushings in it, I ran a rear toe as far out as it would go. I just pinned it.
How much is that when you say as far out as that?
I don't even know. I've never actually checked the toe. I could tell you I have a tow bar. I've never had my car on an alignment rack. I do everything with like little manual tools. I think it was about a 1/4 inch out per side.
Okay.
Maybe not that much. Maybe it was closer to like 3/16.
And you're
street? A lot.
Are you street driving this car?
Yeah.
So how much?
I was. I don't drive it much more.
Well, I'd say the inside.
But yes, I was.
So my Type R was towed out, and I drove that thing, at least one of the ones I raced forever, across the country, both directions, to both coasts, and it would just eat the inside of the rear. I think it was inside.
Anyway, this last year I trailered my car, so it's I kind of got away from street driving the car, which I know is not really in spirit of the class, but that was out the window a few years ago, I think. But yeah, I mean, back to the tire. I think, you know, maximum best tire pressure in the back is of a front-wheel drive car is going to be lower than the front because there's less weight back there. And then going down from there makes it easier to drive and helps the car rotate early in the turn, which will help you
probably get on the gas sooner.
Well, that's the thing. You never get in a situation where you're behind, like you do when you have, the strategy when you have higher rear pressures, I think, is that's the way I feel about it anyway, has to do more with kind of like getting in there and flicking the car a little bit, being more sort of flicky with the car.
Yeah, I don't know if I would think I flick the car. I think I drive very hard and deep and trail brake really deep into some turns for sure. But what you're saying is, honestly, if I can still do that and not have it snap so much, which it sometimes, or break away in the rear, I should say, if I can prolong that, I think that will help me accomplish even trail braking more. Unless, of course, it starts to, if it goes slowly enough, I can open the wheel and or add gas. So that it's a good experiment. I think people should definitely try if you've gone one way and not the other. And I would challenge you all that only go low in pressure, hey, as an experiment, try to go high and see if you even notice a difference, really.
Yeah, right. That's true.
No,
that's happened before.
That's my big thing from business to whatever. Do experiments. It's the Sam it's the Sam Walton way. If you read that book, he was the super experimenter.
Oh, interesting. Hey, you also asked about external reservoirs, by the way, and I'll tell you what I know about them real quick.
Okay.
And that is that external reservoirs, one of the most important parts about them is that they hold extra nitrogen pressure. So shocks are only so long, and in a monotube shock where they're sealed and you have an area for nitrogen, and if you have a big piston, a big shaft, then the more the compression you have, the more the shaft is going into the shock, and the more that the floating piston is displaced into the nitrogen gas pressure, right? Okay. So if you have a small nitrogen gas pressure chamber, you get much greater increases in gas pressure, as you can imagine. So the problem is that when you put a monotube shock on a car, especially a lot of street cars, is you end up with a situation where the shock piston has to be shorter because there's an area of nitrogen down at the bottom that you don't have in a twin tube, which is what most shocks are on cars. And by taking that nitrogen area and moving it to an external reservoir means that you gain back all that area for the shaft to move, and also you can, because you have an external reservoir, you can have a much larger nitrogen area. So that when you put the shock into compression, the floating piston moves, and it's going to move the same amount if the ID of the reservoir is roughly the same. But because there's more nitrogen area, you get less increase in pressure, and that's good. And then the other thing that you can do with reservoirs is that you can add adjustments. Most compression adjustments, when you have a double adjustable or triple adjustable, most times those are on the in the external reservoir. It's not always. Sometimes you can have a shaft that has bleeds in both directions individually, but with an external reservoir, you can actually do the low and high speed compression adjustments on the reservoir.
Oh, nice. No, thanks for adding that. So earlier you mentioned about the height of the car being higher in the front than the rear. Can you tell us, like, an inch difference, half an inch? Was there some way you determined that, or a measurement you played with?
Man, not really. A lot of what I do is sort of by feel, frankly. I tried to, there's a couple things that you have to make sure you do. One is you want the lower control arms to be no more than parallel to the ground. There's a whole suspension geometry thing going on where dynamically, if you let the lower control arm go beyond parallel to the ground, you start getting weird curves. So that's the first thing. But it really has more to do with making the rear as low as I can without making the car feel funny in the back, making it stiff so it transitions fast, but not so stiff that it's not drivable. And then in the front, it's the same kind of thing. I tend to run it a little higher. I'm not even sure I need to, but it's just sort of the way I've always done it because I think that it needs more compliance. Also, a lot of front-wheel drive cars are strut front, and some are strut rear, but some they're pretty, well, most of them are, not the old Hondas and some other things, but a lot are strut front, and struts don't like to be lowered. They start doing funny things where, in general, I think a strut, your center of gravity goes down, but your roll center goes down even more. And so you increase it's called the moment, like the roll moment, and it actually makes the car want to roll more. And so on a front wheel drive car like mine, I don't know, I haven't measured it, but I just sort of go by this feeling that you don't want to go too low on the front of a strut car because it won't work as well. And it's worked really well on my car. I mean, my car feels great. So I don't know if you need to do that on the front of an older Civic or, double air front suspension setup. And I know there's a lot of people that run the front of those cars really low and have done very, very well. So I would say probably not necessary in that way. On the
EFs, what I realized, Jeff Wong, one time I was out in Cali, he's like, the front of your car is too low. And the only thing I noticed about that would bottom out. The other biggest thing I think that's happened in the last 4 or 5 years is people have just kept lowering the rear of the cars more and more and more, where they're tucked in there like no other. So we are kind of just dragging the rear around. There's still, I think, like an inch of travel. I'm not sure the car moves at all. I mean, I guess at some point it can pick up the tire just a little bit still. But it seems like the big thing we've done is we've added more camber pretty much all around and really dropped the rear. But I would have to go look at a sheet to see if mine's, to the jack points anyway, is lower in the rear. And also now I want to go look at the car and see what are the lower control arms. Are they parallel? Are we past that point, or is there still more room there if we had travel left?
If the car's really low, they're probably past that. And in the back, you sort of don't worry about it too much because it's so stiff. But if you're trying to get the end of the car that needs grip so badly, the front of the car, every little bit helps. And I think if I lowered my car half an inch in front, it'd probably still be fast. But, there's this where I said, every calculation and, number that you calculate up in the world, everything changes as soon as you drive it. I have some theories and, read some things, and a lot of it makes sense. And that's one of them. As a component of the car, you don't want it to be too stiff or too low.
Yeah, you still need some travel, and that's where I have bottomed out there in Lincoln quite a few times. There's certain places where there's a pretty good lip between the pads, and especially I ran Pro Parts makes the front adjustable control arms. They take I believe a stock Honda arm, they cut it and shim it. Those aren't as tall as, I'm forgetting the red ones I had on there that had extra metal on top. Those things would bottom out into the top of the wheel.
Yeah, right. I know. I've heard about that.
And that's where, I guess I can raise the car and I guess maybe stiffen it up some in the front. Of course, then maybe I'm losing some front grip. But, yeah, bang, bang, bang. Because I think it was Kevin Wenzel's like, hey, your car is skipping. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I think it's bottoming out. I'm like, oh, really? So, once again, having people watch you drive, they can probably help you if you're anything like me. Going, it's not right there. He goes, yeah, it's your suspension setup.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been to nationals the last couple of years, and it is just phenomenal. I'm talking to Dave Whitener. It is phenomenal how much more developed these cars are, the old EF Civics and ST. But I can tell you that one of the things that I feel, and this is just sort of a personal feeling about things, and that is I'm not the kind of guy that is going to go put hours into a car. I just don't want to wrench on a car that much, but I like the street touring thing. And I don't know, if I got in, if I put a little bit of time into a Civic, whether it would be as fast, probably wouldn't be. But I bet you it would be pretty close. And it's tough, for all these guys out there. Like I might have said, 90% of the people I talk to in a day, they're street guys. They're just wanting to go and have fun. That's most of the people, There's, maybe a lot of the people that listen to this too. And, I think some of that is discouraging to them. But I got to tell you, so here's my 2007 Civic. I put these really expensive shocks on because I wanted to try them. They were amazing. and I'm trying to sort of show that they're not needed, I guess. And I put a rear sway bar on it, and I put polyurethane bushings on it, and I put wheels and tires. I actually went down in diameter, went to the max width, which is 7.5. And I put an intake and the Honda and an exhaust. That's it.
Yeah,
That's all I did to the thing.
Yeah, enough. Yeah.
And the car is really fast and really fun. And you know, I don't want to like poo-poo people who are out there, putting all this effort. But I really enjoy doing the sort of basic stuff. It's like the 80-20 rule, I guess. I love doing the basic stuff and going out and having fun. And I still think that's what the sport is really all about. So it's interesting to hear about this stuff, but I do get to a point where I'm like, yeah, I get how all this stuff works, and lightning things is probably the most important thing there is. But I do really enjoy it only up to a certain point.
Oh yeah, and I debate how much.
I think a lot of people are like that.
Yeah, and I debate how much of getting shock A versus shock B. I feel like on the EF Civics, once you get in the ballpark with your setup and alignment, as long as your car is within probably 3 or 4 or 5 horsepower, once you can lighten. Now, some people weigh 100 pounds less than other people, depending on which one you have, and even drivers weigh difference. I feel like in some of these classes, you can do like the 80-20. You can do 80% of it, or if you can do even 20%, and that's where some of these cars are selling for $4,000 and $5,000, pretty much ready to go. And with the right driver, I think they can beat the other people in whichever car.
Right. That's important too. Is it's not for everybody, but for most people out there, it's not about the car. I mean, it is to a point, but if the car is 95% set up, and the 95% costs X, and then the last 5% costs 2X. You put in another $10,000 into the car or something like that. Is it worth it? I mean, it is worth it if you really want to win and you're up in front with the top 3-5 guys. But most guys in the country are not that.
Yeah, and I think that so many people can locally figure out where they're at. You may be lucky or unlucky, however you look at it, to have somebody that's done all that to their car to compare it to.
Right.
But otherwise, like you're saying, because how much power are you giving up compared to the RSX in your class?
He's got double my power, I think.
Oh yeah, and
I don't know. That might be overstating a little bit, but I have. What do I have? I don't know. He's got a lot more power than I do.
And do you have a limited slip?
I do not. No.
Yeah. So
neither does he.
Oh, I thought that one of those cars had a limited slip.
The RSX that he has does not. No, that would make it illegal for the class, I think, too.
Oh, I swore that one of those. I thought that was one of the benefits.
Shouldn't have an LFD.
If so,
the 05.
You might have to step it
up.
up.
Yeah, the 05 did. The 05. I think maybe the 05 came with a limited slip. I could be wrong, but I think it may have. But the 02 to 04 did not. I used to own one of them actually, so I'm sure of that. And I don't believe his car has one either. But
and you
had a lot more power.
Are you giving up power to the the 2002 or 3 Civic Si even? The first K series motors.
Probably a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. That's the K20, but not the super fancy version of it. That had like 160 horsepower instead of 195 or 200 or whatever the RSX was.
Yep.
Yeah, his first car, the Civic, the SI that he had, was also really fast, but the RSX is definitely faster in a straight line. I mean, I think so anyway.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure that there's a reason they upgraded at some point. I don't know if somebody already bought that car or not. It was for sale, so if you would like one, inquire David Whitener, see if he still has it.
It would be fast. Now, the thing that's interesting about the RSX is that the shock and spring are real far inboard on the back, and the way the suspension works on that car is not particularly good. And so I know that you have to make that car super stiff in order to make it really competitive. Even if you're not very smart about the way you do it, you still make it super stiff and it gets faster. Dave Whitener is smart about it, and it's stiff, and it's really fast. but it makes it completely not a street car. So again, this is another situation where you're building a car that is really only a trailered car. If you tried to drive that to and from an event, you'd have to go to the dentist every time. Whereas my car, I drove to and from the event, not this past year, but the year before with the motion controls. I swapped the rear springs out it and drove it to and from the event. It was terrible, but I did it.
Well, and you probably got 30 miles to the gallon or 35 or something.
Yeah, I think I probably did. But I just it's like loving the days of 1960s Formula One or something. Back in the good old days, kind of thing. It still feels like that. It's like I'm an old guy. I'm 47 years old. I still love the idea of just going out and having fun. And I get it's a little bit of a drag when you start having to think about putting so much effort into the car. And it's one of the things I love about this car that I did is I sort of showed that it can be fast and you don't have to go crazy with it. And I'm not sure that going crazy with it, I mean, it must do something. You take a pound off the car is going to get faster. But I don't know. I'm on a crusade of under preparing cars. I don't know.
You actually.
I want to do it the cheap and easy way.
You're talking stock class. Believe me, at times I'm like, wow, you just drove to the event and you drove on your Bridgestones and you're going to drive home on your Bridgestones. Oh.
I know. Isn't that great?
Yeah, after doing some of that last year, I'm like, this is nice. We're not spending 20 minutes before and after changing tires.
I guarantee you, every single person that autocrosses in a street touring or a mod class contemplates going to a stock car at least a couple times a year. There's got to be. I know I do.
Especially if they dare co-drive with somebody in stock and be like, this is pretty nice. Co-driving's also very nice. So tell us about Redshift, right. Redshift, your company you've had for how long? Take us back to when you started, why you started.
No, glad to. So I started in 2002. I worked for a company called Keystone. We did automotive stuff. And before that, I had worked for Honda, and I had been on the Formula SA18, and I knew I wanted to do something on my own. It was sort of built into me, I guess, from a young age. I'd done like a mail order company when I was younger, and read all the books, and I went out and I started reading Tony Robbins, who I love, by the way.
I have those. I have all those CDs. I bought them in college.
Yeah,
I'm only a little bit younger than you, but yeah, I bought those from the infomercial.
No, he's great. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I know he looks like Superman, and he looks too good to be true. Yeah. He was great and helping me. And we still watch stuff, and I belong to his Facebook, or I get his Facebook messages and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so Redshift, I started in 2002 because I really wanted to do something on my own, and I thought I wanted to do car stuff. I'd been a BMXer when I was younger and got into racing. Wanted to work at a car company. That's why I went back and got my graduate degree and worked for Honda, blah, blah, blah. I came back to the Pennsylvania area to start a family. And first year was great. I was going gangbusters and everything was good. And I had a little tiny place with one day and everything was great. And I thought, I can do this, Here I am in Podunk, Pennsylvania. It just doesn't have the disposable income to handle what I did, which was that I got bigger. So the second year I got bigger. I got a dyno, I did all sorts of stuff. And my average expenses that year were about $10,000 a month. And I made life so difficult, and I worked so hard, and I made so much money, and I had nothing to show for it at the end. I should say I made so many, a lot of sales.
Yeah, you just had a burn. You had a big burn rate at $10,000 a month, especially if that was a fixed cost, not your salary in there.
Well, no, yeah, it's not even. I mean, I hardly paid myself anything, and I had 7 employees, and I had insurance, and I was trying to do everything correctly, and it was the real deal. And I was so inspired. I loved it, but it was the kind of thing where after I'd come through it, I looked back and went like, my God, I haven't made anything. I worked so hard. I've given up so much, and it was the wrong thing to do. I should have stayed small. And then at the end of that second year, I had sort of a personal tragedy. My wife passed away, so I had a daughter, a 4-year-old daughter, and his mom had just passed away, and things got really tough for a while. And I still stayed with the Red Shift thing and enjoyed it, but it was years before I sort of came out and came above water, so to speak, and I went, okay, what am I doing? And started to enjoy it again. But the way I've started to enjoy it is a little bit different. When I first started it, I thought the way to success with this company that I've started that is, is my passion, is I need to have a sort of a basic business. I need to have like a repair garage. That's what I had in my mind. I need to have a shop. And then from the shop, I'm going to be able to sort of do these interesting projects. I'll be able to create products and, do this and do that and builds and all this kind of stuff. But the largeness, the sort of significance of, or the amount of work that I'd created for myself, just trying to do the basic business was overwhelming. And I had such a hard time getting beyond that. I basically never did anything that I found very interesting. I did a little bit, and a few years ago, I changed the way I was doing anything. Right now, I have no employees. I work out of my home, and I have the dyno, and I'm rebuilding shocks and doing all sorts of fun things with no overhead at all. And I still do over 50% of the sales I did with 7 people by myself.
So I'd say you're working smarter now, smarter in several ways.
Way smarter. Yeah, and I'm making more now than I ever have. And some of that has to do with, it's like, you give a ball a big push, even if it's a big ball. You give that ball a real good push in the beginning. You might hurt yourself, but the ball's rolling, And it's a little bit of that. I mean, it was a big company. I pushed real hard in the beginning, trying to get it out there, and it got some good momentum, and it has good momentum. I recently started thinking maybe I should change the name. I posted something out on Facebook, and I got deluged with people saying, no, you cannot possibly change the name. The name's great. So, so it's right now, and I think in today's world, it is much more important to be really good at something for a larger audience than it is to be a lot of things for a smaller local audience. And much happier now too. I actually have a different full-time job, and I can work from home most of the time. I'm in IT too. I know you said something about IT. I do a lot of data analysis stuff, and business analytics kinds of things, and so I don't have as much time to do this passion, this Redshift passion of mine. But maybe someday, if I play it smart, I'll be able to get back to it full time.
Oh yeah, that or you've got several streams of income now, which I love talking business. So anybody has business talk they want to talk about, I'm gonna meet somebody after this podcast, fellow autocrosser, just to talk about some things business wise. I just got back learning more about business from California, so I love that what you've done is what I did in reverse. I had the full-time job and started the side company, and like 7 years later, that produced some income that we could actually take out of the company as well as I could consult. So I wish you didn't have to shrink back down, but we went the other route where hiring people has been very few and far between because of all just the overhead. It's insane. I can't imagine having 7 people very quickly at a company.
Oh, it's terrible. It's the stupidest thing I ever did, by far.
So, but I just love that.
Cool when I was doing it, but man.
Yeah, you think you're winning, and that's so. Something else that I'm going to keep talking business here is being the solopreneur versus partnerpreneur. You've made it work with yourself. You have all the knowledge. You have the equipment. I myself, so people out there, don't kill yourself or think down on yourself if you can't do it by yourself. Everything I try by myself pretty much kind of stalls out. There's not the accountability. But when I have partners,
especially that match. They don't match me exactly. That have something I don't have. That has been huge. So I'm glad that you shared that in this niche, in your passion of autocross, you can make money. Just I think people should think of an extra side income, a side stream of income. Think of it. Can you do something? Start off, and who knows if you pivot and go somewhere else? Who knows if you start consulting halftime there and halftime Redshift, but you still have several streams of income, and yet maybe you're happier and have more free time and can travel and still do some.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think my recommendation to anybody who's talking about or thinking about starting some sort of an aftermarket parts business or autocross business, race business, is be real. One of the things I did early on was I didn't like showing that things were not going well. I figured that you just work and work and work. Everything's good. If somebody says how things are going, and I would say, yeah, they're going great. My strong opinion these days is, and Kinch and I, you and I were talking a little bit about this before, is being real today is so important. The good with the bad, the drama of trying. And I think if you're real about stuff, for one, people start to recognize that you're truthful, which not everybody is. There's a lot of companies around that don't do a very good job at what they're doing. They're trying to do too much. But I think if you know something, if you are good at something, if you can learn something and you stick to that something, be the best in the world at that something, and nobody can do it better, then that's what you should be doing. Whatever small slice of that business. And I'm not saying you can't expand a little bit and try different things and, supporting products or consult or whatever. But your expertise, you need to know what you're doing. You cannot fake knowing what you're doing. So that's my recommendation is be real, know what you're doing. Don't be afraid to show your faults. People will love you for it. And that's one of the big changes I've made recently is not being worried about being perfect.
Well, then I think what you were saying also, you can follow passions, follow your strengths is something big that people will do that. If you're good at something, if people say, hey, your car is set up great, or it may not be racing related, it could be anything. Hey, go, I wonder if somebody would pay me for that, or maybe I should pursue that. I mean, it might be photographing cars. There are people that are photographers, I always tell people, that's their full-time gig. They figured out how to do something, whether it's photoing cars, weddings, something. You just there's somebody else out there that's doing what you probably kind of would like to do. And I love this analogy. I've learned it. I heard it from somebody, and I said it yesterday at this mastermind meeting. I said, think about who you're envious of, and you can find the positive because they probably have something you would like to have yourself. So can you do it? And what I've realized through all this business and mastermind things I go to, I can say the same thing in my own words that Anthony or Tony Robbins does, and different people will listen to me than listen to him. Plus, I can't charge you $1 million a year just to consult for which evidently he does. Yeah, I just learned his son also is in the business, but as he said, I serve a totally different clientele. I am not my dad. My customers know that, and I don't charge $1 million a year for access.
Yeah, right.
So, and the other thing you said about if things aren't going great, if you never tell anyone, no one can ever help you. The same thing in racing. If you're struggling, but no one really knows or mentions it, you have to speak up so many times, I think, to get help. For me, in so many things, I'm blabbing all the time. I'm telling people what I'm thinking about or doing. I know myself as a strength. I'm a starter. I got to tell the funny story on this podcast because Jason Frank and I are now partnered up, all because I started a Barn Dominium Floor Plans Facebook page. It takes off. I upload floor plans I had designed in India, and I uploaded one without a door to a bedroom. Jason Frank, the architect, comments, "Oh, I can't believe that site. That's not good." I go, "Hey, can you fix it?" He's like, "Oh, sorry, is that your site?" So that's where Chris here took action. He started the company. I don't know what you thought when it first started, but today it's so easy to start a Facebook page and Instagram, and and to see if there's interest out there. Do some Facebook Lives and see what they pay attention to. I love the business aspect. So you have questions, talk to some people like Chris or myself that are doing something or have done things on their own, because also not making those mistakes of hiring 7 people. Chris can tell you all about it, or probably what he would do different now.
No.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So,
yeah, great advice.
Yeah, no, let me know anything else. I have to admit that whenever you're talking about BMX, I grew up out in the country on dirt roads, and I had a GT Performer. It was green. I kept it until I moved here in the late 90s. Oh.
Mine was Dayglow pink.
Oh, wow. You were really showing off.
Yeah. I had a Hutch Trick Star, too. Do you remember those?
Yeah, a little bit. I forget which bike I really wanted. It was a different one, and somehow it was even more expensive. So the GT Performer is what I afforded or got it somehow. I always wanted the half pipe or quarter pipe, and either my parents never said, "Yeah, I'll help you do that," or I never pulled it off. Probably good. I had less injuries.
The lumber, and I nailed every nail in there. That's what I did. That's how I got it.
And let me tell you,
it was about $100 in lumber.
Oh, and back then that was a lot of money. I mean, a gallon of gas was less than $1 when I was finally driving.
Yeah, right. That's true.
And we were still scraping together pennies. Hey, who's got the gas money? So no, that same stuff. I was never competitive, not good at doing much of anything. Didn't get hurt too much, so it was good. But if only I lived in the city, I used to think, there's pavement and a skate park, and the good old days.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll see you out there if you make nationals again or some other events. I keep thinking I'll make it east again. I'm addicted to pro solos, so I'm always hoping to make every single one and just have a blast at those. So it's always great to catch up with somebody that has the knowledge you do. I appreciate you sharing a lot of those details, because people have asked about shocks and setup and such. And that's where you are an expert. That's the other thing is, you know that stuff. And I want people to realize that there's lots of things in their own lives that they are an expert compared to most other people, because they have more experience. Once you have more experience, you are much more of an expert. So you have tons of experience and expertise, and I think a lot of people listening do, and they just don't realize it.
Interesting. Well, I guess, I consider my expertise to be understanding the regular guy who has a whatever car, and he just wants to go have fun and maybe autocross a few times a year. Truly, I mean, that's most of what I talk about in a day to people, when I'm talking about car stuff.
And that reminds...
Yeah.
That's where Bob Tennell, when I think it was in the podcast, he and Bob Tennell and Patty are on an earlier podcast. I think it's when I sat down with him a couple of years back talking about business and online marketing and advertising, SEO. And he's like, the race business is not where we make money. It doesn't sustain us at all. Maintenance. So if any of you are out there thinking I got to get into cars and I'm going to set them all up and do alignments for racers, from what I'm hearing from most people, it's the street-driven cars, it's the maintenance, it's the oil changes, it's that area. You have to have an expertise, or you have to have a lot of business built up there and go after that business, and then you can also maybe do race alignments and set up cars. But that's I guess, I don't know if it's 10 or 20% or 5% of business.
Yeah, and another piece of advice that a lot of people have given to me over the years that I'll give to people, and I swear by it, is you gotta charge enough too. In fact, I had this conversation with David Whitener. When you're getting into something, you're tempted not to charge much. Or if you're doing alignments and you want to do race alignments, try to charge the same amount, but do more. And that's a recipe for not doing very well over time, I think. I highly recommend that people charge what you're worth. Don't be cheap. You won't survive. That's another thing. If you're trying to be cheap, okay, yeah, you can get a little bit of market share or whatever you want to call it. You can make a little penetration into the market, but it doesn't last very long. And if you got $1 million idea, it might be a good idea. But if all you're trying to do is sell some shocks or intakes or something, my experiences over the years, it doesn't work, and it pisses everybody else off. And yeah, I guess that's it.
And that's where the value add with Sam Strano, it sounds like he spends a tremendous amount of time, and it's a 2% or 3% markup, and people are trying to nickel and dime. What I realize is you guys have the experience and knowledge that we should pay extra for That's the thing, is you leading us to the correct solution or a good enough solution for what we're doing, not spending $5,000. Maybe we spend $1,500, but we get something that's more than 80-20, it's 90-10 or something. That think that realm of, oh yeah, could I sell information basically, or you're giving away information for free but selling a product on the back end.
Right, exactly. I think that's the strategy for a lot of people, a lot of the traditional guys anyway.
Yeah, and that's what I hope people listening realize. You're trying to buy something from these guys, trying to nickel and dime them compared to the big guys. The bigger people might be doing a loss leader. They might be, or they get a bigger, steeper discount. But the local people are putting information time back in the community.
Yeah, and the guys that are discounting in order to sell things don't know jack most of the time. Those are the guys who can't get business. So I sound like I'm bad-mouthing people, but I'm really not. I'm certainly not bad-mouthing David Whitener. I started out by talking about him. This isn't about him. It's about, eBay and everybody else and their brothers opening up little shops. That don't be the guy who discounts. Be the guy that is worth going to and paying the right amount for, because the right people will come to you anyway, and you'll profit just as much. You'll do just as well, but you'll spend less time doing it.
And it's like having fewer customers or having to ship less things out. You save a lot of time. And when you came back to mentioning charge what you're worth, I don't think I've admitted this before on the podcast anyway. I tell people, I think I spent $600 on alignment. I believe because of the way 3R Racing used to have a setup, it took 8 or 9 hours for them to get my Civic aligned after I replaced lower control arms and such, or pretty much all the stuff to switch to the 91 lower control arms so that the 7.5-inch wheels would fit without rubbing or whatever. I paid like $600. I was like, oh my goodness, I cannot believe I just did that. That was so worth it. I now realize that, I don't have that many. I haven't redone the suspension at that level. And if you do that and you're going to have to pay that much, maybe you try to fix it yourself with some strings first. Or get some friends. I mean, that's the thing. Find some people that know how to do it. Give them some pizza and some beer and $20 or $100 or something. But as much as I cannot believe I just spent that much money, I didn't know what I got myself into. That was the best thing I did, was have that car aligned. I was so consistent after that. It was huge.
Interesting. So did you have a corner weighted at the same time?
Oh yeah, they did all that. Put how much weight I weighed in the driver's seat, etc.
Yeah, and that adds a little bit of complexity to an alignment, and you make one adjustment and it affects something else. That makes it very difficult to do quickly.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, they were used to race cars, I guess, that lifted themselves up. So they were rolling my car back all the way off and back on every time he had changed, is what it sounded like he was doing back then. So since then, I don't know if I paid.
Everything you had to do it.
Yeah, I probably still paid a little bit over $100 for other alignments since then. But once again, if you know somebody that does it right, compared to with as low as these Civics are, you can't take it for the $100 lifetime alignments anymore. They're just too low. And I'm hearing those machines aren't nearly as accurate. And that's the other thing. A friend, he was driving his car back from a shop from the racetrack where it was handling weird. Well, bolt wasn't tight. So the rear camber was going wonky, and the car, which wasn't cheap, almost crashed on the way home. So that's everything. You sometimes you need to pay the guys that know what they're doing, because they're going to get things right. And that's where people also found different loose things, and they fixed them for me.
Yeah, I want to add something there. So I deal with some people who are getting alignments from time to time. People buy products from me, and then they say, okay, well, I want to get it aligned. What should I do? Where should I go? They have camber bolts, the kind of cammed camber bolts with the little washer with the tab and the cleats on them. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people install those camber bolts incorrectly. They'll take them to a shop, give them the bolts. I've heard people, well, just the other day, actually, somebody went to, I guess one of the shops went to install it. They installed it, and they didn't set the little tab the right way, and they just monkeyed the thing together, and they drove the tab right through the lower bracket, the upright bracket. And then when they gave the car back to the customer, they handed him there are these little coped washers. These are street shocks that can use 14 millimeter or 16 millimeter holes in the shocks, but they have coped washers to change the size of the shocks. And they had installed the camber bolts, these camber bolts, without using the coped washer. So it was in a 16 millimeter hole, but a 14 millimeter camera bolt, and had air gun the thing together. And I've seen that more than once. This was especially bad, but that's very true. So if you're having somebody else do your work, make sure that they know what they're doing. This is a guy in Tennessee who said that there was like 6 or 10 of these locations. I don't remember the name of it, but it was even in these places, these high volume places, they have people working for them that sort of, it's a revolving door a lot of times at these places. People that, young guys, especially alignments are one of the things young guys do, people who don't know what they're doing so much. So when you're doing alignment stuff, yeah, I agree with you, Kinch. Make sure you go somewhere that knows what they're doing. If you got to pay $150 rather than $79.95, just do it. It's worth it.
And it seems like so many people in this community, there's some people that know that they will probably help you do it. So maybe you do it at an event, after an event, before an event. I mean, I changed my camber at that morning of Nationals. If you can't beat them, join them. Right there in grid. And I didn't know I didn't know what I was doing. So James Darden was there to make sure I turned everything correctly and dialed in as much as I could, and off we went. So that's the other thing I realized is that use the community if they're willing to help, and try to help out when you can with the community as well. So that's another way.
Absolutely.
If you're pinching pennies, people will usually help you figure it out. And several people have smart strings and such. I have not used those yet, but I keep thinking I will try that.
Yeah, nor have I. I have the 2 little posts that go on like the big long metal tube. That's what I use for the toe. It's cheap and works well. And I have one of those smart camera gauges, that sits on the wheel. Not the one that goes on the hub, but the one that goes on the wheel. I think that together, those 2 things, you can pick those both up for about $200 for the whole thing and do all your own alignments. I think it works fine. Hey, one more thing I wanted to say too. That is that I've loved the autocross community over the years. Even when I was competing against people, and I can think back, whether it's Ron Williams or Jason Tipple or David Whiteman. I mean, these are all guys that I was, neck and neck with. And they're all great guys, and we all still enjoy each other's company. And it's not like that in everything you do. In fact, again, I'm going to go back and talk about Carroll Smith. So he's the guy that wrote all those Race to Win and Tune to Win. All those books?
Yeah.
He's the guy that wrote those, right. So Carroll Smith, he came to Nationals 10 years ago or whatever it was. And he gave a little talk, and besides saying Bilsteins are better than Coneys, one of the things he said was that autocrossing at this Nationals reminds me of Formula One in the 60s. F1 back in the 60s was a romantic period of motorsports. Today it's so technological, so tech-oriented. It's so extreme now, and maybe this is the way I feel about autocross too. Is I love autocrossing because it's great people, and if you're a new guy that shows up, everyone welcomes you warmly, and that's something everybody out there who listens to this should know. If you haven't gone to one, just go. This isn't like a car show where people will sort of like sit back and look at you sideways. Everybody loves the new guy, so I've always loved the autocross community. I still love it. It's why I still do it, and I'm very thankful for everybody, and what great people, including you, Ken.
I appreciate
Although
that.
I've never met you before. I don't think we never met, right?
I don't think so. No, and that's where for all of you that meet me, I am getting better at being with names. Got to be positive about that. So I love it that people are saying hi, even from the videos I put on YouTube and such. So I will try my best to remember everybody. Everybody can also email comments and thoughts, which I've been getting some of those in as well, about questions to ask, just like the shock question to bring up here. So do you have any favorite memories that you want to highlight? I love the story you just told about Carroll there.
I got another one that I had been thinking about before. It's not about autocrossing. Well, sort of indirectly about autocrossing. It was related to autocrossing. So for 1 year, I decided I was going to try road racing. And I got a Neon ACR, 95 Neon ACR with a cage in it. And, I went to Connellsville, Pennsylvania, where it was like an old military air base or something like that. Anyway, it was on a runway. and they made the road course out of the runway, and in between the runways, or where runways joined, they sort of they put pylons or hay bales or whatever. So this is the first time they'd ever run this course. This wasn't Lime Rock or Watkins Glen or something where people have gone around it 1,000 times. And we had qualifying in the rain. I was in a Sherman Stock C Neon in the rain with 30 people for qualifying. And I qualified on the pole in the rain in a strange, on a strange track nobody had been on before. And after that, as I was walking across the parking lot feeling good about myself, I was approached by a few people who said, "You must be an autocrosser." I swear to God, that's what they said. They said, "You must be an autocrosser because you really learned this track fast." And sure enough, people say, good road racers don't necessarily make good autocrossers, but good autocrossers make good road racers. And isn't that the truth? In autocrossing, if you're good at autocrossing, if you're even semi-good at autocrossing, you're a good driver, This thing of going around the same track over and over and over again and, getting perfect at it is not quite the same thing. In autocrossing, you walk the course in the beginning, you got to know what the car is going to do before you go out. You got to figure out how you're going to attack it. There's a whole mind thing. Everything happens so quickly. I heard somebody say once that the average autocrosser puts more inputs into their car, and on the average autocross, than the fastest lap time ever recorded at Lime Rock, and the person driving the fastest lap time ever at Lime Rock. But an autocrosser puts in more inputs into the car on an average autocross course than like the fastest GTP car ever went around Lime Rock. And isn't that interesting? Yeah, okay, so we're going 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, maybe sometimes a little more, but it is so extreme and so much fun and so challenging, and that's why autocrossers are good drivers, right? Isn't that a great story?
Oh, yeah, I agree. And the
it almost sounds like a fib, but it's not.
No, right? And that's where, for any of you that have not gone onto the track, for me, I think I'd probably been autocrossing 7 or 8 years, at least 4 or 5, and I'd gotten pretty decent. And really, I got decent at catching the Integra as it would try to spin out or go around on me. So I go to Second Creek the last day it's open, the day before it's closing, because I kept resisting, saying, I want to stick with autocross. I'm afraid if I start tracking, I'll get addicted to that. And it was so crazy how I had somebody drive my car first. I'm like, yeah, I've never done this. But as soon as I went out there and drove, he's like, you've never done this? I'm like, oh, I've autocrossed a lot. He's like, because I was in an Evo and it would start to slide. I just opened the wheel because the turns were just forever huge. You had so much more time, and then, there's another turn coming up there in like 6 seconds. It truly, I think, does help, which is Ross Bentley's autocross book. I think he says, you want a road race, just road race. He didn't start at autocrossing, so I don't think he can have the same perspective I do, whereas if you get really comfy at autocross, if you're somewhat competitive, if you can handle catching your car when you do get out of control, I think you're going to be so much safer when you get to the track. I totally believe that. Yeah. I think everybody should come out and do that. And like you're saying, I don't think many people that road race, even if they get good at that, do they want to come autocross? I see people doing both, but I feel like those are the people that were autocrossing forever, and they still like to come back and do it because of the sport, because of the people, because of the different challenge of, can I nail this in 3 runs?
Yeah, absolutely, no question about it. That's absolutely right. And one more thing, I got one more thing for you, and that is about the Evo school. One of the things that changed how competitive I was, I remember I said back when I got the 94 Celica GT, one of the things I did is I did an Evo, stage 1 school, or phase 1 school. I did an Evo phase 1 school. My instructors were Sam Strano and Ron Bauer. And man, did that change how well I was understanding things. And the thing that I remember most from, 2 things I remember, one from Ron, had to do with how you look at a slalom. this thing of being able to look ahead at the end of the slalom is so important, and it's very, very hard to do. So if you go into a slalom looking at the beginning of the slalom, you've blown it. You've got to go into a slalom with your sort of focus in a way toward the end of the slalom, because what you're going by at the moment, you can't do anything about that. You can only change, your position in an element that's ahead of you. So
like 10, 15, 20 feet ahead. Can your input now make any difference? Good point. I like that.
And it is the hardest thing to do in a slalom, because you're boom, 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 boom. You're going by these cones, but it's like I was a pitcher in baseball for a little bit, and one of the things that I was always taught was look at the pitcher's mitt, focus on it. Don't take your eyes off the pitcher's mitt. You look where you want to go. It's like, don't look at the wall if you're in a spin. You've got to focus on what you want to hit. And the same thing goes for a slalom. The same thing goes for looking ahead. You can only affect where the car is going to be in the next element. You can't do anything about where the car is going to be except miss the cone, essentially. And so that's the one thing that Ron showed me. And the thing that Sam showed me was actually this similar thing. And that is, he talked about how in some schools, or something he had done before, was putting a big, tape or opaque tape on the bottom of the windshield, so you couldn't even see that. You couldn't see in front of the car. And I've never done that, but I always thought about that. And how when he rode with me, or maybe actually, I think I actually drove with him. He was driving, kind of pointing out the window, showing me where, this is where to look, this is where to look, and pointing way out, what then felt like way out. And, and it's one of the things that has been the biggest difference between me doing, being mid-pack, which I was the first 2 times or 3 times I was at Nationals, and when I went there with that 94 Celica, was this sort of knowledge that you got to look ahead, and you can only affect where the car is in the next element. And it's, I can't overstate how important that is. You got to know what the car is going to do, and if you can hit it at speed, that's when you get really fast. So you hit it at speed and know what the car is going to do, but be paying attention to the next element. That's where you trophy or better.
That reminds me, this last year, I guess it was at Nationals on the test course, Brian Peters hopped in and rode with us. And what I remember him saying was, get your eyes out of the slalom. I'm like, I'm just now getting into the first 3 or 4 cones. Get your eyes out. Get out of the slalom. He wanted us to get out as quickly as possible and have our eyes out. And then coming back to what you said, you just gave the best reason for keeping your eyes up to at least the next element, because you can't affect what your car's doing by very much. I will admit that I look at the cones a lot of times as I drive by them, and sometimes I make those micro inputs. But in reality, I can't move the car but maybe inches once I'm within probably 10 or 15 feet at speed. The faster the speed, the less change I can make.
It's like strategy versus tactics. You can sort of, you can manage where you are now, and it's important to manage where you are now to be where you want to be in the next element. But more of the speed of where you are currently happened, in the last element when you were setting yourself up for the one you're in. So, and I think left foot braking helps that too. People ask me, well, how do I left foot brake? What do I do? And my answer is, I have no idea. It's all it all just kind of happens. I don't know. But the thing I do know is that it allows me to slow the car down slightly if I need to at the right moment, in a way that you can't do if you're moving your foot back and forth and your inputs are much smoother. So,
so this brings up the question: do you also just lift sometimes, versus always using the left foot to slow down?
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, sometimes I use my right foot to brake.
Okay.
My left foot. If I'm in a big braking zone where I'm coming out of a really fast section and I'm, banging the rev limiter in second gear, a lot of times I won't actually use my left foot, I don't think. And the reason is because my left foot's not quite as good at modulating the brake. And even with ABS, you can still. I think sometimes it's just too important to enter a turn correctly if you're really at the limit. And I find myself like getting, you go into something where if you blow it, I like get scared, almost like I'm going way too fast. What the hell is going to happen? You know what I mean, right?
I
use my right foot because I feel like I'm about to just, the car's going to like flip over on its roof and slide off into the fire.
I love that thought of, lately I've been trying to right foot brake some. I love the thought of making it different maybe for the big brake zones because as Ross Bentley said in the last podcast, it's so important how you come off the brake and how that should be different for different turns and different cars. So that's huge. And then when you said getting scared, what I've had to, and I'm still making sure I work on, is sometimes I'm not scared or excited, maybe excitement. I'm like, wow, I'm going really fast here. What happens is I want to go fast for just a little bit longer. Where in autocross, we're usually going faster and faster each run if we're getting better each run. So if anything, I need to brake a little sooner. But for something's wired wrong at times where I'm like, I can carry it. I'm going fast. I have to carry it just a little bit further. And then you have the pain of, oops, I just pushed in the turn.
Yeah. Well, if you're going real fast and then you have a section where you have to be perfect, I find that my right foot does that a little bit better. My left foot just isn't as good. And I'm a soccer player. I think I'm considered ambidextrous. I played left wing in college and stuff. So I have a good left foot, but you still, when you're really pushing and really at the limit and you're trying to beat David Whitener and you're putting everything you can into the car and trying to whisk past the cones, with your hair on fire. I don't know. My right foot feels like the right one to be using for braking. I use my left foot more for slalom and slower sections, I would say.
So that's interesting. I like left foot braking the most because in these front wheel drive cars, especially, I learned in the Integra for years and years, whenever things got sketchy, I would add just a little left foot and it would somehow keep the car from skating out. So something about me, like slaloms, if I'm going way too fast, I just bleed off a little bit with the brake. I don't really lift. I'm basically, sometimes it's gas and just add some brake to it. I feel like the car lowers down and has more grip.
Yeah. I think that too, and it depends on the corner. I think I'm having a hard time remembering exactly when I use my left foot, but I do believe, I remember in Ohio this past year, I remember a couple sections that were fast, and then they would lead into a 90-degree turn, which is a very different thing than a 180-degree turn. A 90-degree turn is more about speed maintenance, I think, or I don't know. I may be sort of not really explaining this well, but where you have a fast section into a sweeper, I think it's more likely that you should use left foot braking. At least that's how I do it. Because there's less braking. You brake and then you use the car, pitching the car, and it slows it down. And I'm on the gas before I go past the apex anyway. And but compare that to something like where you're going super fast into a slalom, where if you get behind at the beginning of the slalom, you're really in trouble. And I might actually use my right foot going into, or maybe a 3-cone slalom or something. I might actually use my right foot going from a fast section into a 3-cone slalom that really isn't really a slalom. But you know what I mean? It's if I think I'm in danger of hitting a cone, sometimes I'll use my right foot. If I'm in a big sweeper with a lot of area, then I can kind of just, let the car sail through it. If it pushes a little bit, don't worry about it. Just drive through the push. Try not to spin.
And that's where that makes you think, I think I'm really good at not making a mistake and to become two mistakes. So if it's pushing a little bit, maybe I'm scrubbing off some speed, I don't then create somehow a second one, or I'm a little bit offline here, so I'm going to press harder and make it more offline. I feel like the faster you are, the better you are at getting that focus of getting back to where you need to be, whereas some people seem to compound their mistakes. Like, the car's pushing, so I'm going to put more steering wheel input into it, when in reality you need to open it up.
Right. Yep.
And that's where people really need
And
to have people
front-wheel-
riding with them to know, I guess, if they're doing that or not.
Front-wheel drive is very unforgiving that way. If you lose speed, if you go into something and you're late and you got to lift throttle and you slow down, if you have like a 6-cone slalom and you enter it a little too fast and it slows you down, it's very hard to get going. Then you're slow the rest of the way through the slalom because you can't accelerate through a slalom very good in a front-wheel drive car. I mean, if you have a limited slip, maybe there's things that are different, but generally, a front-wheel drive car, for me anyway, is more about maintaining speed and dancing the back of the car so that you're not spinning it and you're but going through as fast as you can without using too much of the gas.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the fastest way a front-wheel drive car goes through a slalom.
Yeah, I've
is
got,
maintaining speed.
and what you just pointed out, I didn't realize this when Ross Bentley covered it in the presentation a week or two ago. If you slow down too much in the higher speed sections of the course, it takes you longer to get back up to speed as compared to a slow turn where you have more torque and better gearing. So when you said, I think you said you use your right foot in some of those situations, when there's less to bleed off, maybe most people that may want to try left foot braking shouldn't be doing it there. Because however you can
that's probably
be
right.
more refined, that hit me. I'm like, oh, yeah, no kidding. You want to make sure if you overslow, like this last event, I guarantee you it was a first gear S2000 AP1 shift. If anything, I err on the side of being too slow in the slows, but also very, very tight. And now I get that you have less pain there because you can get back up to speed. You can gain 5 miles an hour much quicker.
Yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah. And the other thing I should say, you were talking about, tight areas and being slow, and it reminded me of something that I generally like to set my car up so that it's fast in the slow sections and scary in the fast sections. So if you're driving the car and you can sort of hang on to the car in the very fast sections and, not hit anything, meaning oversteering, really, the back being too loose. If you can hang on to the back in the real fast sections, but be fast in the slow sections, that's what I think really is fast in an autocross.
So it moves enough in the slow to make it faster in the slow, but you then limit how much it's going to move, or you only let it move enough that in the fast you can still handle it and catch it.
I think so. Autocross is not about going fast. It's about lowering your time. And people forget about that, In any element you're in or trying to put elements together, it's not about how fast you can go between them. It's how quickly you can get from one to the other to the other to the other. So, that's an interesting thing to talk about real quickly is what do I do during a run? What do I do before a run or during a run? And the reason I mention that is because one of the things I do is I don't plan exactly where I'm going to be. I have these sort of little tricks, these little sort of phrases I use, like, back of the cone or get there. These sort of like triggers that I have where I know that I need to be, there could be a 10-cone slalom, and the only thing that I'm going to think about is that I know that the spacing is, I know what the spacing between the cones is because that's important. Does it get wider? Does it get closer? And how am I going to enter it? Or if there's two elements together, like a Chicago box, and then a slalom or something like that. It's not always about trying to go into it as fast as you possibly can. The feeling of speed is sort of misleading. It's more about getting through it quickly. And so when you're saying you don't try to be fast in the slow stuff, sometimes you try to be tight, because sometimes that can be as fast or faster as trying to go through it, with the car sliding sideways and, being as fast as you can. So.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely. I like to tell people if you're not in the top echelon to get there, I think being tight and tidy is the easiest way to get there. And is it easier to be closer to cones going slow or fast? I say slow. So if it's a tight section, I want the tightest line possible, which also means I'm driving a little bit slower than any wider line. Is how I really think about that.
I agree with that. That makes sense. Yeah.
And if you stopwatch people like I used to do, David Falth and Bob Tennell, you realize they looked really slow, but they were much quicker. I mean, even with a stopwatch from cone to cone, you're like, wow, that was a second faster in this 180-degree turnaround. I mean, that's where, not having to make assumptions, I was actually watching and noticing and going, wow, they're just much tighter. Other people are going and pushing deep in there, and a second later they come out. I'm like, whoa. And that's where data,
it's interesting.
Data will show us that now too. So you don't have to have a stopwatch.
Yeah, I got to get into the data logging thing. I do data all day long, and I've never had anything on the car that data logged. I did with Phi Lee in the '89 Civic for a little bit, and we would compare things, and that was very interesting. But boy, there's some great stuff out there like that. What is it? Solo Storm, I think, is a good one. That's pretty easy to buy, kind of, pretty cheap and good. And there's a couple other ones. But I got to give that a shot.
Oh, exactly. No,
I've never really used that. From when I started doing this in 1990 to now, which is 27 years. Good Lord. I have used data logging one time with Phi, maybe 2 events or something like that, and only just to kind of compare what I was doing to what he was doing. I've never used it doing anything else. Old school.
Yeah, no, you might become addicted to more data. Let me see what
I
can.
One, man.
Yeah, now you can look at shock valving and everything else compared to data if you can get enough practice time.
True. But it's trying to marry what is fast and what feels good with your times. So whether I'm doing dynoing shocks, so I'm trying to sort of sense what does the graph mean to how I would feel about it, right? So I'm doing a lot of learning. I'm back to my first day skiing with doing shock stuff. It's very cool, and it's going to be interesting to see, whether I can make the car as good or close as it was last year with the high dollar shocks. That's the easy button, those MCSs and dealing with those guys is fantastic. Boy, do they know what they're doing. It's just expensive. So if you have the fun, do it. If you don't, maybe we'll have another option soon. You spend your money on go on vacation or something.
No kidding. I was looking at something for the family. I'm like, I keep hearing buy experiences over things. I'm like, I have cars I should sell and do more experiences. But I know some MCS shocks sitting on a Civic that's not running. That at one point I think he said I could borrow those. I might as well change shocks each of the last 3 years. That's it. We'll put some remote reservoir MCSs on there and play with that. Yeah.
So, and my last piece of advice is have fun. Fun and happiness is a state of mind, and I'm engaged now, I'm happy to say. My daughter is 16. She'll be going to college in a year and a half. Life is looking up, so, be happy.
Yeah, it's good.
That's the way to spend your life, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah, that's so. I'm glad you shared that in Tony Robbins. I'm a big taking in positive, listening to things. I listen to YouTube more than I watch it for all these different things. And people, I spend more time on podcasts and things than probably most people. I'm almost always plugged into something, even if it's not on. I'm still plugged into my ear. So hey, talk to me. I'll pause it. But a lot of times I forget because I'm so used to that. So I would recommend people. There is so much free information out there, from cars to positive to Tony Robbins, anything, you name it, it's out there on YouTube at this point, it seems like. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely.
I'm going to point out Van Townsend. He's like, why do you listen to all that? Aren't you positive? I'm like, I can be more positive.
Oh, man, no. And I met my fiance, 5 years ago or something like that. And she I don't know if she knew who Tony Robbins was, but I hear Tony Robbins coming from the basement where we also have workout stuff every morning. Pretty much every morning she's down there doing yoga, and I hear Tony Robbins' thundering voice. That's our morning ritual.
Nice. I always remember he always said you avoid pain, you try to avoid pain, and you seek pleasure. So every decision he would say you can break down to that, in that everything you're doing it because you think you're going to feel better about it. So that's I think about that quite often.
Yeah, absolutely. Live inspired. That's what I love.
I like it. I like it.
Inspired.
Chris, thank you for all the time and all the insights. It's been great.
Oh, I hope it's helped, and I'm honored that you wanted to talk to me. I hope everybody got some I got some value and had a little bit of fun listening to this.
Yeah, how should people contact you? Through Redshift? Go to their website, Facebook page?
Yeah, go to the website, redshiftmotorsports.com. I have a Facebook page. Yeah. Either of those two would be fine. Email's great. Facebook messages is fine too. It's not hard to reach me.
Very cool. Yeah, that's where most people in small business, I tell you, customer service of getting back to people is the biggest reason I can say that Riptide Hosting competes against any of the bigger people. We generally answer the phone or call you back. That's the biggest thing I tell you. If you can get back to people at this point, that's how you can beat out a lot of other people.
Absolutely.
If you have the knowledge, the expertise, and you will actually talk to people, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. The way I put it is I try to be a mom-and-pop store online. I mean, remember the days of the mom-and-pop service, and you don't see that as much anymore, but people love it when you are real and respond to them and call them back. Because so many times on the internet that just doesn't happen. People call or email and nothing ever comes back. So, especially when you're small, you got to respond to people, and as quickly as you can.
Yep, I agree. And that's where Facebook, treat them like it's a phone call, follow them, pay attention to what they're doing, pay attention to your customers. You can learn a lot because people are sharing it online these days. All right, thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Ash. All right, have a good one.
Thanks for listening. For the show notes and contact information, please visit autocrosstalk.com. There you can also subscribe so that we can keep you up to date on new shows as they come out. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes and subscribe on iTunes for the upcoming shows. You can connect to our Facebook page at facebook.com/autocrosstalk. You can share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, your suggestions there. Also share with your friends. Hopefully you found it entertaining and motivating, and hopefully other people will as well. It's been fun, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening, and check back next week for the next show.